Hello everyone, welcome back to another Reaper blog video. Today we're talking to Joel Schwartz from joelschwartz.ca and filmguitars.ca. I think I got that right.
.com on film guitars.
Damn. Today we're going to be talking about media composing, what that is, how do you get started with it in Reaper, and then various tips and tricks of doing the tasks that a media composer needs to do inside of Reaper. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks so much, John. It's really awesome to talk to you. I have been a fan and followed your work for a long time, and I think many of us who use Reaper, and certainly myself included, are standing on the shoulders of giants here, such as yourself, in our workflows and all the things that we have, added to our and refined our workflow over the years. So I want to thank you for all the work you've done for me and for the Reaper community, and I'm really looking forward to having this discussion specifically about scoring and talking about how great Reaper is for that, and I'm hoping that there will be other professional media, film, TV composers who start the discussion and add to what we start here.
Excellent. Yeah, and I mean, helping people is why I do this, and it gives me a lot of joy to be able to see someone that's like so far ahead in their career that can still benefit from the dumb things that I've learned over the years of playing around with Reaper and trying to keep up with all the different updates. Because I know that like busy professionals don't have time to read out all the change logs and test every feature. And so I know that by doing the update videos, reading the change logs, talking to the devs and stuff, like that's really a beneficial thing. So yeah, thank you for saying it.
Yeah, of course, man. It's so valuable, and I sometimes listen to those specifically as like a podcast where I'll listen audio only. I'll be like, oh, cool. There's this new thing with markers, which actually we should talk about as we get into the weeds here. That it's really, really useful for somebody who's doing media scoring, where you want some markers to be related to just time, and others that are going to move with your tempo changes. So yeah, there's lots to talk about, for sure.
And I think you're going to fill in some of the gaps that I have in my knowledge, where I see these different things, but I don't always know how they'll be used in practice.
Oh, interesting.
Because I'm not a full-time composer, even part-time composer. I've got my one foot in so many different things.
Sure.
Right? So I play guitar, I play with synths, I edit podcasts, I make videos on Reaper, using Reaper, and like all these different things are so separate. And I don't always get the workflow experience with all the different Reaper features.
Right.
Even just reading changelog, talking to users, I sometimes don't even get the full picture of how a particular feature is useful to people.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And, maybe by the end of this conversation, I will totally change everything I do based on your recommendations. So we'll see.
Let's talk about media composing, media composer. What is that? I'll start with sort of my definition, not looking it up, but just my understanding of it is this is someone that composes or creates music for films, TV, games, commercials, rather than individually calling those things out. You're saying, I'm a film composer, I'm a composer for TV and games, or TV and film. Media composer is sort of this new term that's come up that kind of covers all of those things, because so many people work in the different industries, which are separate but related at the same time. Is that kind of your definition of it, or am I completely off?
I think that's right on. I think it is a good word, and I think most composers will identify with media composer. I wouldn't say I fully identify with media composer. I think because I haven't done any games, I haven't done as much in that world. Like, my world is more film and TV and more drama, kind of narrative, character-based stuff. It's not that I haven't done other things. It's just that just is my world.
Right.
So there's something about media composer for me that I don't totally identify, but I think your definition is good. There's so much media out there, so much visual media, and so much of that needs music and needs bespoke music. And the reason we need bespoke music is because we're trying to add emotion, or we're trying to help a story along, especially in the world I live. It's, there can be long montages or long conversations that without music is brutally boring, of course, to just watch and listen to. But with music, it can be like really effective and powerful, and the music can be complex and have a lot going on, or it can be really simple and minimal.
So I think that the term media composer is a little more accessible, and that's why we're using it here today. Because when you think of film composer, you think of John Williams, you think of Hans Zimmer, and you don't think about you and me or, or anyone, right? Totally. But anyone could be a media composer, right? If you work in commercials, if you work in film, TV, games, if you do all of those things, in the gig economy or whatever, right? Like, you're a freelancer, you're working on multiple things, and it's all scoring, it's all using Reaper. I think media composer is a good, accessible term that people kind of intuitively understand.
I guess what it does is, because the landscape has changed so much, where if you're doing content for something outside of film TV, which was like, maybe I'll say the previous moniker, and now there's so many different destinations for music that include...
it could be online mainly,
all these things,
distribution.
Yeah, that resonates. Yeah, I get that. I can share this. Agnostic of any DAW, like, whether I'm using Logic or Pro Tools or whatever else, the goal for me, and I think any composer, is to stay as much in the creative flow as possible. We don't get into music to be tinkering with DAWs all the time. We don't get into music to be like dealing with our Vienna Pro server crashing, or, all the different tech things. And as composers, we want to be in the creative flow. Like, that's why we started music. We want to be doing our best work and not being interrupted. And at the same time, I'm having great communication with the people who hired us, who for me is usually a showrunner, producer, director. And I have found that Reaper has been just a godsend for doing that. Once you set up some systems for yourself that are individualized and customized, which a lot of composers kind of usually enjoy or require, you're really able to meet the very fast deadlines and kind of need for very high quality delivery that is expected of media composers.
Maybe you could share your screen now and take us through what a project looks like.
Sure. There's kind of two sides of this that I think is good to talk about. One, I'll say, is the creative side, and that we'll get into. That's going to be like the score template. That might change for every show, right? Or film. You might come up with an aesthetic that is unique to that film or television series, and all your sounds for that show will be there. So we'll get into that. This is on the creative side, and that would include just some mixing starting points, really quick ways to navigate your template, and basically having everything set up and ready at the touch of your fingertips. Now, the other side is what I'll call broadly like the project management. I'm including the video in that, the specific naming conventions, standards for rendering, cue assignments if you're working with another composer, handling revisions. And again, like, the whole goal of this is to stay in our creative flow as much as possible. I think it might make sense to start with video, because that is usually the first thing we receive. And I'll use the example of Sullivan's Crossing. This is the episode I'm currently working on. It's season 4, episode 8. Maybe we should talk about just how I set that up. So the first thing you'll notice up here in the top left, like, I have 2 project tabs. One is for video and one is for the audio template. And the reason why we want to separate these two things is because if we make a cut to a score and say we want to eliminate this, we'll remove this. If it's score, we don't want the video to then change, because what you'd have to do in that case is, if you make a split here, it'll make a split in your audio and your video, which you don't want. So you want those to be 2 independent things. So I have found the project tabs to be really, really useful, and maybe we can talk quickly about syncing those two.
Sure. Is this actually a sub-project type setup, or is
No.
it just two tabs running simultaneously?
Don't get me started on sub-projects. I'm not a fan. And there's a lot of reasons why I'm not a fan, because you need to have, and we'll get into this, in scoring, you need to have specific naming conventions, and those include like file versioning. And once you start doing save as, the sub-project thing falls apart. So I do not recommend sub-projects. So
I completely understand, and that's why I don't use them myself.
I have really tried. I'd love to hear your thoughts here, but how I have it set up, these all checked. Run background project, run stop background projects, play stop background project with active projects, and synchronize play start times with play background projects, as well as display video from background projects. What a lot of composers will do, or historically they've done and still do, is they will use TC, timecode, to synchronize two different apps. So they'll have a totally different app that handles the video. And that is a pain in the butt. If you've ever had to use timecode sync, it's really a pain in the butt. And so when I discovered that REAPER could house two kind of distinct projects in one, instance of the program, it's such a powerful thing.
Well, I'll say that it is possible to compose in the same project as your video file, especially if it's not a long project, an hour-long show where you've got, 30 cues that you have to write. If it's one cue you're writing for something and the video file's there and you just compose right underneath it, nothing wrong with that. And
nothing wrong with it until there is something wrong with it. Sure, if they say there's a 30-second commercial or something, or whatever, a 30-second piece you're doing, it might make sense, but it is handy to have them separate. But absolutely, if someone's just starting out, plop it into the same project. That might be easier. However, what happens if you start to work on a television show? You see all these regions or cues. You start to do save as projects, and you end up, or at least I have ended up with many versions of copies of the video, which could be like a 3 gigabyte file, right? So there's some cleanup that then is required, and it gets out of hand quickly. Okay, so in any case, like, this is my recommended setup. I strongly recommend that if someone's working on a longer piece, like a video or a TV show, separate audio and video into two different tabs that you're then working with. The thing that you will do first is you want to go into project settings, and this is some basic stuff here. Just make sure that your projects are using generally 48 kilohertz, and make sure you're using the correct frame rate. And you'd want that, of course, on both tabs to be using the same settings there. When composers receive video, what is typical, and not always the case, is you have a stereo file like this, and the dialogue and the temp track are stereo separated mono files. So what I do, and what I think most composers do, will then send those to two separate tracks that are then going to not play hard left and right, and they'll be mono-centered. On my video track here, I have audio from the left side, audio 1, going to channel 1 and 2 of my dialogue track, and then audio 2 is going to 1 and 2 of my temp audio track.
Master parent send is turned off. Exactly.
Yeah. So in my case, those are then being routed to my total mix, like my RME. Dialogue is being sent to 8 at 1314, and temp audio is 1112, 8 at 1112.
And those things are specific to your setup, but for someone that doesn't have like a multi-channel
like interface,
yeah, these could just go to 1 and 2, and this is something you would have to make sure is bypassed or muted when you actually render out your score, your cue.
Well, if you're working in the same window, John, which I do not recommend for many of these reasons.
Right.
And this is another good reason. But yes, absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
I've nerded out with some of the post-production mixers and tried to see, like, what are you guys using on your dialogue track? So I've tried to kind of replicate many of those plugins, because when we receive audio from its camera audio, and it's usually really noisy. So having something, this is an inexpensive plugin called Supertone Clear, but there's lots out there that we can just reduce the amount of ambience or reverb and just clean things up, so you're not dealing with camera audio, or lav audio, which can be.
That's something I didn't even consider.
Yeah.
That would it be unmixed audio that you're getting?
It's sometimes even on great high budget shows, it's sometimes brutal audio. So I take it through this app to clean it up, this VST, and then I'm chopping off the highs and lows, and then I have a fast compressor, a DS, and a limiter. It doesn't really matter which plugins you use for this. There's a whole bunch from Isotope, of course, that could do this. And this is the chain that's working for me. I'm not a post-production mixer. I'm a composer, so it just has to work well enough, But
is latency a concern with that at all?
You tell me. I haven't had that issue. It seems it's totally synced with lips, and there's not lip flapping for me. Okay. I haven't had that, so I don't know. I haven't had that issue. Knock on wood.
It's not something that I usually think about. Like, no one's complaining that my videos are out of sync, and I've got 4 layers of compression, limiting and stuff on my voice, and no one ever complains. The first thing I do is align the voice with the picture. So yeah,
that makes sense. If that's all you have is you have your video and your dialogue and temp score separate, you're kind of ready to go. But I'll share some more details about this workflow that I think are useful. So this is an episode of television. At the top, we see all these regions. John, my understanding is we're going to have 2 conversations, so we'll get more into this on our second conversation. But these are all regions from the spotting session that we've worked with the showrunner. I'll talk about that. So these are all the places that music is going to happen. Okay, and some of these are assigned to me, and some of these are assigned to my composing partner, Ari Poser, on this show, and some are assigned to the music editor. So at a glance, what's powerful about this is I can see what kind of my to-do list is. It's like, okay, here's all the stuff that I have to do for this episode. And now we will talk about this in our next conversation, but I have a script that brings these right from QDB or Google Sheets into Reaper. So I'm not creating any of this stuff manually. So that's a, really powerful time saver. But maybe it'll be useful to talk quickly about spotting. I mentioned that word. Yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know or is sort of on the verge of knowing, of working with somebody, basically spotting is when you're going through an episode or a film or a piece of media, and you're talking with the showrunner or director or producers, music supervisor. You're watching the show all the way through, and you're discussing when music needs to come in or when music should not come in, or potentially when there's licensed music. You have sometimes a very specific conversation, sometimes it's rough, but you decide together where music is happening and what kind of music, what the purpose is, what the kind of emotional calibration of that music will be. And so that informs all of our work, whether we're the composer, the music editor, or the music supervisor.
Yeah, and I imagine there's parts where the action needs to be punctuated by a stab or something like that, maybe, or the music needs to die out by this certain time. Exactly. And all that would go into the spotting session.
Exactly. So that's all in a spreadsheet, whether it's QDB or Google Sheets or whatever else. It's basically time code in, time code out, who's doing it, then the name of the cue, and, whatever pertinent details of description are important. So that ends up through a script, which we can talk about next time, into Reaper. Apart from that, I'll just briefly talk about the lower part of this template. As you start to put an episode together, it is referred to as an assembly, at least in my part of the world. And so the assembly is all the collective cues and licensed music from myself and my co-composer all in one spot. So as you can see, there's these regions. I'll zoom in on one, and there's the cue, right? And you can see this one has not been done, or actually it has been done. This is the music edit column track. So The assembly is the collection of all the music. Below that, I have a music edit. So this is anything, a track just for music editor. This is anything the music editor has chosen. And that's an opportunity for us to provide, as composers, provide feedback. Sullivan's Crossing, this show in particular, is 4 seasons deep. So we have a really big library of cues. Our music editor, Kirk, will take a stab, and sometimes we have notes, and sometimes he nails it. But all his stuff is here. And finally, this last one, I'll just touch on briefly. This would be a unique workflow to me, but I really like it. I'm using item notes. So what I've done here is I have a script that brings in notes from frame.io, which is a video, like a timestamped video tool, I'll say. So the showrunner is making timestamped notes at particular times, and I'm importing those notes right into Reaper, so I don't have to flip apps. I can see it all right here. Her note to me, let's find one that I've done. She said, why is the music uplifting here? She has arrived, so like it allows me to say, okay, I see what she's saying. Great. Like that makes more sense. Like let's change the cue slightly or in a big way to make sure that it's matching what the showrunner, producer, director is hearing there. I like it having it all in one place, but like a lot of people might flip back to QDB or Frame. But I find this workflow super useful. I usually have this one pinned at the top, wherever that is here. So, and I can really, see what's going on. Yeah.
In the past, I've used markers or regions for things like that, but when it is more than a few words, then you need kind of a different system.
Totally. And, there's a shortcut I have on my Stream Deck that's just new note. And then, so nice. There's also times when composers will give notes. And so I use this actually just to make notes on my timeline, and I'm able to export all of those. And we'll get into that next time.
Let's look into the actual cue sessions.
Yeah. So flipping over to our audio tab. So we've done the work of syncing these two tabs. The template is where all the audio and MIDI tracks for recording and mixing are happening. In this, there's a bunch of metadata and settings that we'll get into, and there's some specific rendering stuff. If people's eyes are not glazing over at this point, then we'll jump in. So again, I mentioned this before, the audio part, the template is going to be different for every single show. Sullivan's Crossing is a very acoustic-based show. There aren't a ton of tracks compared to some shows where you might have a huge orchestral template, dozens of tracks and production. That is not this show. It's kind of like an indie folk vibe. I play a lot of acoustic guitars, and there's gentle strings on it. Just sharing that because that's the cue that I happen to have up.
This project is maybe 60 tracks or so? Probably less.
Like, how many tracks are actually being used in this? Oh, I'm sure less. Okay,
but there's like 174 tracks total in your template, including folders, and many of them are blank. But it's a template, and it's kind of everything is ready for you to use without having to select a plugin, name your tracks, those sorts of things.
Thank you for saying that. That's the whole point of a template, is to set things up with all your routing, and your routing might be super advanced. Like, you might have a ton of external hardware and different preamps and synths and a patch bay, or you might just be all in the box. But the point is to have your favorite sounds that relate to whatever you're working on, just like at your fingertips and ready to go, so that you're not being held back by creating tracks or figuring out what, we don't want to tinker. We want to create.
Do you find that you're doing many different tempo changes throughout a cue for a show like this?
In this show, there's kind of two types of cues. One will be kind of action type cues, and the other ones will be more underscore mood based cues and more emotional. For the action cues, yes, definitely tempo changes happen. Key changes can happen, less in this particular show, but certainly that can happen. In this particular show, there is not a ton of that. Things stay like pretty even in that regard. And I'll also say that I tend not to do that type of scoring where there's like boom, boom, boom. We sometimes call that Mickey Mousing, where it's like changing on a dime every few bars. There are some shows that certainly need it, and there's some very talented composers who do that. But yeah, we can talk about that. We can talk about how I have the template kind of divided up. Tell me where you want to go with this.
Let's say we're looking at a cue and we've got our spotting session. Mm-hmm. From there, I would guess that you'd come into your template and you would start probably mapping out the tempo, figuring out the tempo.
So let's find out where downbeat, where score came in. Okay, so this is on screen is somebody having a phone conversation. They're hanging up the phone right around here. Okay, so I wanted the cue to start here, right? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. First, like I generally kind of improvise with the scene a little bit on guitar, piano, or whatever else. I'll tap the tempo in, say it's around here. I'm just guessing. So 90 is actually 100, but so I'll tap it in and have an idea. I put that in here or anywhere, and I do set temp to signature, and then I allow partial measure before this marker. And what that allows me to do is if, let's say we want this to be like right here, okay, at this moment, we can move this to be exactly the downbeat where we want it. That's how I do it. I'd love to hear if there's different ways of doing that, but that's how I've always done it. What do you think,
I think
John?
that's interesting. What I would probably do is just mouse wheel over. So if I have my cursor there at the start of that time position, I would go to the transport tempo indicator and then mouse wheel over that to line up the downbeat.
Say that again.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Put your edit cursor to the previous tempo marker.
Oh, my original one here. Yeah.
Go up to transport bar BPM indicator.
Mm-hmm.
And then mouse wheel over while looking at the one at marker 3.
Oh, interesting.
So
I see.
So rather than dragging, I'm just changing the tempo. So it's not going to be 100 there. It's going to be something else until the BPM downbeat gets in the right spot.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that makes sense. I think the problem with that is I need a bar or a couple of beats of count in before this actually happens.
Yeah,
so I think
the count in and pre-roll count in things sometimes are not the correct tempo or what you want.
Right.
So
for better or for worse, I found this has worked. It's
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is making a time selection for the exact amount that you want that action to be on, and then doing one of the right click, create marker from time selection,
right,
that sort of thing.
Right. I like what I didn't do here that I should have done is actually put this tempo marker like several minutes out, because what you sometimes get is a showrunner is asking, okay, like I don't like where you started. Can you start it way earlier? And if you only have, I've only given myself a bar and a half to work with ahead of this. Mm-hmm. In this case, I know exactly where she wants it, and there's a transitional scene before it, so I'm very confident. But if it's, say, kind of midway through a conversation, I'm saying, okay, I want to hit when this word happens, it's often a smart idea to give yourself a lot of pre-roll. So this setup that I just said, where I'm putting the tempo in and then doing the allow partial measure before this marker, I would put that maybe as far as like 2 or 3 minutes ahead and aligning my downbeat where I want it.
Yeah, just always having the ability to adjust things.
Totally.
Just setting yourself up to be able to make adjustments without a massive headache. That sounds like one of the things that would be helpful.
Exactly. And if a showrunner wants me to move this slightly. Like, say, it's like, no, Joel, you got this like way too on the nose. Can you, do it a little later instead and do like a string pad in advance and then hit the downbeat like a little bit later. It's really easy for me to add in some time here, right? And empty space, insert empty space in selection.
Yeah.
And then the video is not affected, right? It's just moving my audio over and all this stuff is still intact as long as I do it ahead of here. So really useful. Maybe it's good to talk about the template. I mean, essentially like how I have this set up is divided into instrument groups. For me, I also do a lot of music production. So I have, it's not in this template actually. I have a whole bunch of vocal stuff. And then it goes into acoustic guitar, electric guitars, keyboards, strings, basses, drums, and I have a couple others that I'm not using in Sullivan's. So I have it like a parent level folder with, say, acoustic guitars, and then I have kind of different sounds or routing or setup for each acoustic instrument. I have different, I have mandolins, banjos, dobros, all sorts of stuff like that. But the navigating of this, John, I'm using one of your scripts that's quite old but really useful, and it's a custom show e-guitar track. So as an example, maybe you can link people to this video because it's really useful. So it basically, when you see me scrolling through here, it's just showing my acoustic guitar tracks. And so if you have a controller, that is really useful to just, and just being able to quickly navigate through templates, which could be like hundreds of tracks, right?
Yeah.
So link people to that video because that's a really useful one. And I'm just using my Stream Deck.
Yeah, this whole concept I got from Junkie XL's videos back in,
okay.
I don't know what year it was, 2018, I'll guess. Because he had these studio time videos where he was talking about his work on Mad Max score, and he uses his touchscreen controller, I think it's a Lemur, and he had these different macros set up, and like, oh, I could do that in Reaper. That sounds great. And then I set it up, and then Reaper WRB came out, and then that one of the main reasons like for that to exist, and then
and that's how I use that too. Yeah, really powerful.
And it's something that I still use. Mainly I use that with a docked toolbar beside my mixer. So I'll just click on bass and then just shows me the bass tracks. And so mainly I'm looking at that stuff in just the mixer.
I happen to have a Stream Deck, but I used to do that, yeah.
I just hate the button feel of the Stream Deck, so that's why it never like permanently got assigned for Reaper use, but
I see.
Can't run OBS without that, so...
One thing I want to add that I think would be useful for people to know, especially if they're more new to composing, is that where it's different than mixing music is in music we have everything going to a 2-bus or a master track where all your channels are being amalgamated into a stereo mix. What we are 99.9% of the time asked to deliver in scoring is stems, so that there's just greater control. And so the mixing approach is something to get used to. It's different than mixing a music track. Similar but different. So the way I have this set up, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, I have... as you see, tracks A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and you can have a lot more. You could have A2, A3, there's lots of ways to do this, or these could be named instrument groups or function. I have it A, that's how I've been taught by my mentors. Each of these, in effect, has like a mini mastering mixing chain on it. I am sending to this A stem, this is all my lead instruments. Anything that's like doing a melody essentially, or is like the lead instrument. On B, it's my keys, any keyboard patches or synths. C is pads. D is percussion. E is basses, and then F and G in this show are utility. So anything extra. This might be like a second lead or something that doesn't fit the mix.
Sure.
There's other ways of doing this. You could do this by people who have more orchestral templates might do high strings, low strings, high percussion, low percussion. and that's fine too. I have found that by function is more useful for me because I play a lot of guitars on scores. And so if all the guitars were in one, say they were all in the A, it's like the supporting guitars, the production kind of sound guitars, we would want potentially separate from the lead guitars in this case. So I have found that function is better than just like instrument groups, where I have it down here as more instrument groups. So what I do is on each track, and I have a script that does this really quickly, but I'll click on the send, and so that's being, as you can see, that's being sent to track 3, which is A. So this acoustic guitar is fulfilling kind of a lead role, whereas if I go to strings, for example, down here, this will be being sent to C, which is my pads.
Okay. And individual tracks are sent rather than the folder. Is this something that you might change per cue?
Totally. Because again, like I might have a track might have honestly like 4 acoustic guitars on this show. We want to give flexibility in mixing them after, so there might be some that are kind of like yummy, strummy background guitars, whereas one might be doing like kind of vibey harmonics that have a bunch of reverb, say. And they're really different functions. So that's why I have been taught to do it this way. I found mixers like it. And that's what I've always done.
Because somebody else is mixing your project, do you find that you defer certain decisions to them?
Yes and no. So all of this is absolutely a team project. Like where it's different than being a music producer or an artist. Like you are working with all these different people, and composers are a key creative, which is a designation. It's one of the important roles, very important roles. But it's a very collaborative thing we're doing. There's all these people come together who are making this work of art. And so absolutely, we're having conversations where there isn't room to be totally rigid. However, the job of the post-production mixer is less to like mix the levels of the audio, like the stems. Mm-hmm. It's more just like in case we need to. I'm delivering them mixed audio. It's very, very mixed. I have put a lot of thought into this. On each of these stems, I have a compressor, I have an EQ, I have another EQ, I have another compressor, I have a limiter. These have been mixed. They don't need any more audio processing, really. They're panned out, it's done. What the post-production mixer does is if in playback the showrunner's like the percussion is driving me like wild, take that out, then we have that flexibility and I'm not having to re-render things.
Okay.
But the post-production mixer generally shouldn't be like doing big level EQ compression changes to what I'm delivering. They're taking the entire package, which includes Foley, dialogue, and making sure it's all working together in terms of the bigger picture. They're not getting into the weeds like we do with music. Yeah.
I didn't think so.
Or like how a music producer, like I might send it to an external mixer and it's like, here's my dry tracks, like make it sound good. It's like, no, these are done.
Okay. Yeah. In the context of dialogue and everything else, because you're not even mixing your music to the finished dialogue. You don't get that at all right? So that makes a difference, and that's why there's a separate mixer.
Totally. And like, if a mixer says we gotta, the guitars are poking out, we gotta take out 5K, no problem. Like, I'm not gonna be upset about that. I like it's whatever's in the best interest of the project as a whole, but they are being delivered, let's say like broadcast ready from me. Yeah. This might get into a little bit of weeds here, but it's important, I think, to talk about, and that is file naming conventions, and render settings. This is a place where Reaper is so strong and useful if you set it up right. So there's a lot of ways to name cues and name shows and films and stuff. What you generally see it as a bare minimum is what we have up here, which is M, which means music, and then it'll be the cue number. In this case, it's 1315. So that means there have been, 1,300 cues before this one. On some shows, I will do, it just depends on who I'm working with or what's happening. The name of the project might be saved as the initial of the show. So SC, Sullivan's Crossing in this case. And then you do the episode number. So in this case, 04. So I might go SC 408 is this one, and then M, and then the cue number. After that, there's a version number, and it's .5, and that's really just for me. It's like I like to do, if I ever do big changes or if I'm doing a full rewrite or whatever, I use the versioning. I'm just constantly doing that, so I have some history. And a Reaper setting that you went over recently that is really useful, John, is this save new version of project format. And I have it, for me, I have it set as .1. You could do obviously just different systems for this. So that's where my file name is M1315.5. That's the project name.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when we're rendering, what we're delivering is any stems we're using. I don't deliver blank stems. Some composers will. So in this case, and I have a script that selects all of these. We'll get into this next time. We'll go through the render settings real quick. I do not usually do this manually, so let me look here. Okay, score stems. So where Reaper is just so useful for this stuff is in populating these file names automatically. So the way I have it, it creates a folder for the project title. So in this case, you can see it's M1313.5. Dinner plans is the title. So if you go into project settings, I'm giving the cue the title, and I'm also giving my initials here. So this is the weeds here a little bit, guys. M1313.5, and then the title, which is dinner plans, and then the actual file names. And this is
the first part before the slash is a subfolder.
That's right. Yeah. That's the parent folder here. And then I have the project name, so whatever I'm calling the Reaper project, the track, and so that will be, say, A or B or C. Mm-hmm. I think this is an old.
I think you just need to change your source to.
Okay, there it is. Yeah. There it is. M1313.5A. So that will be my lead stem. And then underscore title, which is dinner plans underscore JS. That's the author, my initials. And then I have the start TC there. So that's this. In case for some reason the broadcast media file, something happened or something got lost in translation. So this is important to check here.
Yeah.
Something happened. They have the music editor or the post-production mixers have this as backup, so we can say, where was this supposed to start? So in the render settings here, we have it starting here and here, right?
Yeah.
And so this will output a file just starting here. It's just a huge time saver, like not having to write all of that manually. It's that alone saves so much time, right?
Right. And if it wasn't clear in looking at the render settings a second ago, that was to render out 5 separate tracks, each with a unique name.
That's right.
That's automatic based on the track name would be the only difference there based on what tracks were selected. So
that's right. And so I have a script that will automatically select, and we'll do this next time, that are automatically select stems that have audio being routed to them. And then it will also render the master, because that's useful just in case they need to reference that as well.
Sure.
Take a breath now. That is like the rough overview of how I set up Reaper for scoring. We
didn't look at MIDI at all, which I thought we would, but I don't think we have much time for that.
I'm happy to do that, like next time or whatever. Like
maybe just some sort of rapid fire, what do you like for a MIDI controller, keyboard controller?
I like something with weighted keys and 88 keys. I have a very basic MIDI controller. It's the M Audio Hammer 88. My friend Christian recommended this for me. Unlike a lot of media composer, I don't do a ton of keyboard stuff. Okay. But it's a good keyboard. It's solid. It's no frills. It's weighted, and it has a mod wheel.
Cool.
So perfect. Where I've really invested, I would say, is my expression, which I have a Lele. It's like a $400 expression pedal that's beautifully smooth, and so when you're doing strings and stuff, it's really a pleasure to use. That hooks up with USB, so I have, on any given string library, it will be set to all inputs here and just grabbing from both of those devices.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
In terms of expression and dynamics control, like what was it, CC1, CC11? Mm-hmm. Are you using sliders on the controller, or are you using a separate third-party controller?
I've done both. I have a fader port, so I can actually do CC on that. I do that occasionally, but 99% of the time, I have one hand on the mod wheel. My one foot is on the expression pedal, and I have one hand on the piano.
Okay.
And I'm playing it in.
Okay. And
I'll fill it in if needed after. These are all ensemble patches in this case. It's just what works for this particular thing, and it's so I often do different lines, like different melodies, rather than like all in one go. I'll start with you can see these are just dyads. There's just two notes here, and these are just solo. I am just playing in this case, pretty simple stuff on the piano, and then I'm just building on it to expand the voicing as needed.
Do you have any recommendations for good all-around sound library, like a company to follow for that? Or there's so many choices, it's kind of overwhelming. What do you recommend? Let's say general string library.
So I think it's useful to have something intimate and something big, both. Okay. So the classic one, I'm sure there's others, but the Spitfire ensemble, chamber rather, I think does the job really well. There's a lot of settings. There's a lot of options in there that are good. And then the very first library I got was the Spitfire Albion 1, I think. And that's a larger orchestral thing. So there's moments where you might want smaller sounds, like in a more intimate conversation, and then that might expand at some point as things get more emotional. You bring the whole, big orchestra in if required.
Okay.
Like there's lots of free stuff, I'm sure. There's inexpensive stuff. I think it's really useful to have something, if we're talking strings, which I am not the expert on, but if we're talking strings, I think it's useful to have something small, close mic'd, kind of intimate sound, or at least small ensemble and then a larger ensemble,
like a quartet.
Yeah, totally.
Plus a full orchestra,
where it's
12, 24 violins, that size orchestra.
Yeah, and people go crazy with this stuff, right? And you can really, and what's beautiful about string libraries is there's so many cool libraries out there that are like, one of my favorites is this Olafur Arnold's one. It's like very kind of scratchy sound, soul point, like really, really neat. So I love that really textural, intimate sounds. I have Swarm. I do have a lot of Spitfire stuff, but there's certainly a lot of other libraries out there.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts on this?
Only, John, I am super grateful for you and all the work you've done. Again, I've really followed your videos, and the REAPER blog community has been useful. Your courses, I think I've got most of them, if not all of them. And more than anything, I'm not trying to say you should necessarily do it exactly as I do it. This is not a DI how-to video. This is how I do it. I think I've found some cool workflows that are time savers and work, but where REAPER I think is so strong is that you can really customize it and you can make it your own. And I think that's again where it really works for media composers in particular. And again, thank you so much for all you've done for the community, man.
Fantastic. Yeah, and couldn't agree more with being able to customize Reaper, make it bespoke as the music you're creating is so important, and one of the greatest benefits of using Reaper. Thank you so much for joining the call today and sharing your tips and tricks and your workflow. We will talk again. And thank you everyone for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Blue Sky. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon. Visit Joel's websites, linked down below. And visit reaper.blog for more tutorials.